Time for our class to begin. If you have your outlines, we're the latter part of lesson 2. We didn't quite finish, kind of rushed through question number 9 and 10. We dealt a lot with question number 9. We're not finished with that one yet either, but we didn't really get to do number 10 very much justice. What we see in the passages on giving, that here is a local church. Local church is comprised of not congregations, but of people in a locality. And we see that the church had a treasury. When we go to Acts, the 4th chapter, we'll find that it's the idea, what is a treasury? That means, well, you got to have a bank account at Wells Fargo, wherever. No, it's a place where you bring all the money together in one place. And they put it at the apostles' feet in the first century when the church was being established in Jerusalem. And from that treasury, that collectivity of people bringing their money to one place, they were dividing that among the saints that were needy. So we began to realize limited benevolence. Every time you find the church collecting money and distributing that money from the church, it is given to saints in need. You don't give it to everybody in the world. It's not a benevolent organization that we're here to help all the poor in the world. It was very limited in its benevolence. We saw that. So this giving that we see taking place in 1 Corinthians 16, 2 Corinthians 8, 2 Corinthians 9, that it is dealing with that contribution to the poor saints in Judea when the famine came upon them. So they were collecting this money. So we notice in 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 2, does it tell you a day in which that is to take place? On the first day of the week, and we connected that together with, what else were they doing on the first day of the week? Acts 20 and 7. Breaking bread. They were taking the Lord's Supper. So it would be when people were together in one place. They would take care of this as well. I was separated from the Lord's Supper. And sometimes how do churches do that? They will have the Lord's Supper and then they'll have a song. And then they'll come back and those men will come back up here and they can pass the plate. Well, have you passed the plate in about a year? We all share where's our treasury back here? Before we put it in the bank. It's in a box. And we put it in there as individuals. As we go back there, it's not taken around because we're trying to help keep people clean of COVID-19. So that's been a protocol we've had in. We take the Lord's Supper. We each have our packet. So we've had to improvise in order to do what God says do and do it in a safe way as we've been able to determine. So we see that taking place. So notice what he said, you're to give as you have been prospered in 1 Corinthians 16, verse 2. Prosper means I've been on a good journey. God has blessed me well on my journey. And what we begin to see is that the type of giving that God has always liked, he wanted the first fruits of the Old Testament people, the firstlings of their flock, the first fruits of their grain, that would always go off the top and give it to God from that standpoint. And we began to realize, well, has that giving changed? But what do you see? And we have passages of Deuteronomy, the 14th chapter. That's Old Testament. And what word describes what we're driving at here of giving? They were to give proportionally. And what will we call that in the Old Testament? They would tithe. T-I-T-H-E. They would set aside 10% of their herbs. If you want to be very particular, the very finest herbs, they would tithe those things. Anise and cumin, they would tithe the things of their flock. So we have the giving of first fruits. That was another aspect of giving in the Old Testament. But here was the one of tithing. Do you find in the New Testament God said tithe? You don't see that. Well, did he condemn it? No. But see, we're looking at what authority do we have for giving? And we begin to realize, well, there was a difference. It's very clear in Deuteronomy, the 14th chapter. They'll tithe all the increase of thy seed. And he speaks of all the things. You'll do that year by year. But you'll notice that in verse 28, at the end of 3 years shall be another tithe, which would help the what? Would help the poor, those that don't have anything, fatherless, the sojourner. They'll help the poor. So there was a different tithe for that, but it was tithing. And they would give a tenth of what they have. Now, most denominational churches and most churches, the idea of tithing is just being carried over into the New Testament, Christianity, that let's tithe. So what do congregations do? You'll see a card back there. Have you dedicated your tithe for the year, or what have you? And they very much bring that over there. But what we see in the New Testament, you are not to give 10%, you're to give as you've what? Prospered. And you're to give purposely. You know, why you're giving. There's a purpose, there's a sense, God has blessed me this much, I'm going to purpose in my heart to give this much, and God leaves it up to you. And regardless of what we give, we're supposed to give how? What's our heart supposed to be like? Cheerfully. If we start giving too much, I don't know, we need to save that money for this or that, and we've heard jokes about that. Woman nudging, and we've got some things we got to pay this week, don't give that much. All that sort of, sometimes the husband, we don't want to say it's just women and men, but there's also jokes about that. He didn't tell you how much, or a tenth, or proportion, but it's as you prospered. And we found a man in 3 John, yes, he was one that he prospered, and as his soul prospered. That was the wish of John, that he would prosper as his soul prospers. So there's a sense of my spiritual well-being is prospering. I hope your health, I hope you prosper in your finances and all those things. I hope it prospers just as your spirit is prospering. Well, when we have a love of money, our spirit's probably not prospering very well. And if that prayer were answered, we wouldn't get much. But he was prospering spiritually, and God was going to bless him accordingly. That was the prayer that the Apostle John offered. So there is a change in the giving. There's not a set amount like 10% of your income. But a lot of people do that when they're starting out. What do I make a month off the top? I will give 10% of that. Others say, well, what I make, I have to subtract all the different expenses that I have, and planning for this and planning for that, and vacation every year. And at the bottom of that, I may give proportionally of that. That's how people think. But I think the more we grow spiritually, and Paul will argue this in the 2 Corinthians, the 9th chapter, 8th and 9th chapter, that God blesses seed for sowing to those who give abundantly. He's the one that gives the seed to sowing. He's the one that we're stewards of what he's blessed us with, and we return. And the fact that we give out of a purposed heart and a sincere heart of thanking God for prospering us, we'll find ourselves giving liberally, and God will in turn bless us liberally. That's the way it works according to Apostle Paul. And I think that's true. I think it's been said that when the character of people, money does not change them, but it just exaggerates them. And I think there's some truth to that. Good people, when they're poor, they'll be good people when they're rich. Now, money can change people's hearts. But bad people, when they're poor, they're going to be bad when they get rich. It just exaggerates it. And I've seen that to be true in a lot of cases. That it brings out your character, but it exaggerates it even more. And so we need to make sure our heart's right with God. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, so we keep ourselves from that. We're looking at how, God, you prospered us. I want to give accordingly as you prospered. And we see examples. The church in Macedonia, They gave out of their poverty. How do you do that? Well, you gave proportionally out of your poverty. What did the poor widow give? Gave 2 mites in Luke's account. Gave 2 mites. Each mite was worth 1/8 of our penny. Let's rub those 2 mites together. What do you have? You're going to have less than half of what our penny could buy. Was that much? She gave that, and the rich people were giving out of their abundance, their superfluity. This is above everything. I'll give out of that. How I want to spend my money. I got it. I got enough. I got a lot. And they were giving a lot. Now, if you compared what 2 mites were to what they gave more. But how did Jesus look at that? Excuse me? Yeah, and she didn't half it up either, did she? She gave all of her livelihood. That's why she gave more than all the rich people. Because not a one of them went into their livelihood. They gave out of their abundance. She gave of all her living. Now, Macedonia, they gave out of poverty. They didn't say they gave all their livelihood, but they gave out of their poverty. They didn't have those things, and yet they gave liberally according to what they have. So God is not putting a percentage. He's not putting a law so that everybody's got to give the same. It is an individual matter of our heart, but I think the more spiritually minded we'll be, and spiritually minded mean I believe in God's law of giving back and blessing us more. I believe in that law, then I will give liberally. I will give abundantly. And I'm not going to hold on my money just because I just want to save and that sort of thing. Ecclesiastes says it doesn't do you any good to look at it. Money does you good to use it, and he wants us to use it to his service. So I believe there is indeed a difference of the giving. And if people, I'll make a rule, I think I just want to start giving 10%. It's about all I can do anyway. Well, that's a good place to start. But it's not because God commands tithing, or that even God commends tithing. When you start looking at really what the people of Old Testament tithe, they didn't just tithe 10%. When you put it all together, they tithed a lot of their money. That was just a way of, hey, I got 10 sheep, 100 sheep, 10 dedicated to God, something like that. They could use that as a standard for which they could give. But there is a difference. And see, New Testament Christianity, its form of worship changed, its form of giving changed because its priesthood changed. It wasn't a priesthood based upon men living and then they died, another priest comes in. The high priest is Jesus Christ. And he has opened the way in our relationship to God. We're all priests if we're Christians. We're all priests. And we offer up spiritual sacrifices in our service unto God. So the whole system of worship has changed. That's why you don't have any example where the New Testament church was playing mechanical instruments of music. You'll never see that because it wasn't there. And so, well, he didn't condemn it, but what did he authorize? What kind of music did he authorize? We talked about that. Psalms, hymns, spiritual songs. We sing and make melody in our heart to the Lord. And that was the a cappella sing, speaking to one another. That part of worship changed because the change of the priesthood. That's why you don't have it specifically condemned or specifically authorized. He authorized what he wanted, and we're to respect his silence. That's the passage I wanted us to, we didn't go into detail, but we saw in Hebrews, the 7th chapter. I think that was the last one we went through. Well, forget that, I changed slides. So that's what we're dealing with. Any questions on that? Something else you want us to say about the giving that we have? Yes?
That was interesting. You pulled out in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, in verse 5, he talks about then preparing the gift ahead of time. So that also went to that when you purpose in your heart, you need to have that already set aside. But the reason for it, or
And why would it be the other way of someone being, if they did not purpose beforehand, why would it be an example of having grudgery when you did give? What would be the purpose of that? It's because it's being forced on you. Paul's here and he needs his money. So you didn't purpose in your heart out of a cheerful reason for giving. It's that Paul's here, I got to give it. And there would be a sense that's not freely given with cheerfulness, it's that I've got to now. And I think that's why he wanted us to purpose. And he wanted this done so when he comes, it will already have been purposely given out of a joyful heart, and hopefully it would be a liberal gift unto the people. All those factors. We talked last time in 2 Corinthians 9 how many things were transformed from money into spiritual blessings. Remember, we went through that. It was that, well, here's fruits of righteousness. That's a spiritual quality. It came from their giving. It offered thanksgiving to God. And next verse, they offer much thanksgiving to God, because individual Christians were helped. And what did they do? They will thank God for these people over here that sent that. And God, you get the credit. You get the credit for that one. You get the credit for the next one. So much thanksgiving would be unto God. And if we see as our money as blessings from God, we're stewards of it, if we can find ways to transfer that money into spiritual realities we see in the New Testament, supporting preachers, supporting the teacher that teaches you and so forth in the New Testament, I think our heart will stay right. And the stronger spiritual people are, I think you don't have a problem with giving. And I'm so amazed. Whenever something comes up here, we always find a way to give, don't we? Because your heart's good. And maybe you have a lot of money, I don't know. But your heart's good. Some people, a lot of money, don't give any in this world. But you're always there, and it's always an abundance, and I think God continues to bless you because of that. And giving is sometimes a subject that we don't like to talk about. It's a subject that says, well, maybe the elders need to go check out who's giving what. And I've heard churches say, well, I need to oversee the flock. I'm going to go in there and check out how much you're giving. And all of a sudden, I think you're not giving enough when you all of a sudden you dig deep enough, you find out they're helping so many family members with the money that they have. You don't know their business. And you don't know all the stuff they're doing. So it's kind of not a very good idea to do that. I remember an old preacher friend of mine during the days when contributions might be on a week, you might have $400 or $500 given during difficult times. He saw that his church wasn't giving. The church where he was a preacher wasn't giving. And he preached on it. And he preached hard on it. That people were just holding back. And the more he preached, the contribution stayed about the same. I was a little boy then, but I found out through just watching what happened, and then learning a little bit later is that there was a guy, he was counting the money, and he was stealing from the church, and he did real well because the contribution went up, he just took it off the top, and everything stayed the same. So there were people, love of money, gambling, and he was the one that always gave me candy. I liked that man. Now I know why he gave me candy. He had a deal going. But that's a sad thing. It's reality. It's what money does to people. But here people were giving, and they wanted to give more. And here's the situation they were. But we don't know what all responsibilities people have for their money, and God has left that to the heart of the individual. We need to preach on it. We need to teach on it like we're doing here. And I think people will rise up because we want to be what God would have us to be. Any comments on that? Let me go back to the Lord's Supper, and this is a part of application of things that have currently happened. We talked how COVID has affected people, and that people were, at home taking the Lord's Supper, and many people began to set that forth. That's been practiced for years among brethren. It wasn't something that happened because of COVID. COVID exposed it. They've been doing this for years. That's why people are upset to be looking at, well, it only happened when they came together on the first day of the week. They came together in one place, as we saw in 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 20. And Zoom is not in one place. We talked about that. Let me throw another wrinkle here. Back in 1984, there was an article written by a well-known preacher at the time where what was being practiced then, it was starting to be practiced among some churches, is that you cannot take the Lord's Supper by yourself in the assembly. You come together on the right day, you're in the assembly, but if you partake of it and the whole church doesn't partake of it, it's not scriptural. As it when you proclaim the Lord's death, that's a plural pronoun. And there was that particular teaching that really is dealing with the idea of the communion is something that the church does. That's how you partake. How do I partake? I partake as a collective group. But we've seen in 1 Corinthians 11 that, and everywhere in the New Testament, when you want to pick where the assembly and the time, we talked about this adverb, when, is always connected. When they what? Came together to break bread. When you come together. It's not possible to take the Lord's Supper. When is when. How we partake is individual. You follow me on that? Why do I say how I partake is individual? Let each man, he's got to discern the body of Jesus. Who does that? The collectivity or individual saints when the saints are gathered together? Well, they came together in 1 Corinthians 11. Let's turn there and just see, well, how do we partake? On which we trade, he gave thanks. Verse 24, it said, "This is my body, this do in remembrance of me. In like manner, he also took the cup, saying, the cup is the new covenant in my blood. This do as often as you drink it in remembrance of me." So we say, well, that's still collective. For as often as you eat the bread, drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death till he come. Wherefore, whosoever, now we're getting to what? Whosoever shall eat the bread and drink the cup in the Lord in an unworthy manner shall be guilty of the body of the Lord. He's now driving home to the individual. An unworthy manner, American Standard says, that is not, I'm unworthy and I can't partake this Sunday. Okay, you may be unworthy and not overtake, but that's not what this passage is teaching. It's an unworthily manner. And what was the unworthy manner in 1 Corinthians 11? They made it a common meal. They weren't discerning the body of Jesus. They weren't thinking about his sacrifice on the cross. And the individual was involved in remembering that. But let a man prove himself, not ourselves, himself. And so let him eat the bread and drink the cup. For he that eateth and drinketh to drink the judgment unto himself, if he discern not the body, not the body. So we're thinking about that. I don't look around and see somebody else partaking it so we can do it together. Because here's a point that I don't see those people dealing with. Let's say we all did it together. We're kind of doing that on Sunday, aren't we? We each get our, pretty simultaneously there. So let's say we're doing that. Well, we're okay now with some of those people. They were eating. They had a common meal. They were eating. They were drinking here. They were divided. Some weren't able to do any of that. They made a common meal. The others were perverting that. Unless you discern the body, you're not partaking of the Lord's Supper correctly. Wonder if you do it right, and I'm right there with you, and I'm thinking about where I'm going to go lunch. I'm not partaking scripturally. How would we ever know until the judgment came that we partook of the Lord's Supper? It's impossible for you to take the Lord's Supper. Well, they're eating and drinking, but they're not Discerning the body of Christ. How I partake is an individual matter, but it's when we do it. It's not in our own homes, away from the you have homes to eat in, but you wait for one another as you partake of that. So my way of thinking, they have confused the when for the how. They've made the when that everybody has to do it together. And they've made that the how when it really was just the when. So coming together, what's another when about coming together? First day of the week, so I'm coming together, I'm in the right place, all in one place, on the right day. That could be anytime during the first day of the week. So we've had it in the evening time. And that's when we do it. And so there was an article written by one who I think made a good point, that people don't realize that they're almost like having Catholicism, because they're making the church as a barrier between the individual and their Lord. You follow that? Because I can't partake of it on a Sunday night when the brethren have waited, they're still serving the Lord's Supper, they've already partaken, and they're allowing individuals who could not be there, shift work and so forth, they can partake as individuals when they've come together, and we've set aside that purpose for breaking bread. Someone said that you can't do that. You have to all do it together. So somebody stands up during the days when we didn't have COVID fears. Men are going to give that. If someone stood up and took it by themselves, and so what people started doing, it says, well, if one partakes, we all partake. And we'll do it as many times on that day we have to. So people again say, well, I can take it twice. As often as you partake, I guess I can do that. And that's how people were dealing with the problem. A lot of times people, when gas prices go so high, the problem was solved because people said, we're only going to come one time on Sunday. And so they began to say, well, the first service, we're not going to serve the Lord's Supper. But then we're going to have the class period, and then the second service, say at 11 o'clock, everybody will partake of the Lord's Supper. They only serve it one time. They don't meet on Sunday night, so that took care of the problem. People said, well, no Sunday night service. But I want us to see what the problem signifies, that we all have to do it together. One cannot do it, two cannot do it, three cannot do it when they're on the right day, when they come together, because that's how it has to be done. And so that caused this particular preacher to write. That's 1984 when those things were brewing. And a lot of times people meeting at one time on Sunday has solved a lot of that, but it's still around. So when COVID hits, that article becomes very popular among brethren. Because what's happening, you are not allowing me to take the Lord's Supper in my home. The church is getting in the way of my relationship with God. And they're using that article, and I think you can do that because I think the preacher wouldn't have had a problem with, he's dead. He didn't have to experience all these things. But knowing him, talking with him, I don't think he'd had a problem with people taking the Lord's Supper by themselves in their homes. But I asked, what's the pattern? His point was, we become practicing Catholicism because we make the church as the essential part of my relationship to God. And I just want us to see that for a moment. Is the church getting in the way of my relationship to God on giving? When were you to give? We already went through it, so there'll not be a problem. When were you to give? First day of the week. All right, what were you not to do when you lay by and store? I lay by and store my home. I will do it beforehand. I will purpose in my heart. And I will lay by and store in my home. I say, Paul will not allow that. Why? Because the church is standing between the individual and their Lord. I'm going to give as I prosper. Do you look at the church being a barrier to your giving? That's the question I want to ask. Or is it the way in which it's going to be fulfilled in its purpose of how it's going to leave town? Paul did not want to gather it when he got there. And yet, I will do this in my home, if you please. And I don't have to be there. The church doesn't have to be there. I don't have to be on the first day of the week. And I'll give as I'll prosper at home. I don't need to be there. Well, then Paul wouldn't be pleased with you, because he didn't want to go to your home and collect it when he came to take the money. He wanted it in one place. So when did they collect that money together? On the first day of the week. I wonder why. Because on the first day of the week, they were already there to do what? To break bread. And the church is not the barrier. It is simply when we come together as the church, we each individually are having fellowship with the blood of Christ while we're here in our assembly. The church is not getting in the way of me taking the Lord's Supper correctly, but that's when I do it. And I don't do it privately in my home. I don't have any authority for that. Well, it didn't say not to. You like that argument? We just dealt with that. It didn't say not to use instrumental music. And what's connected with when? Y'all said it. First day of the week. You like that when? I think I want to take it on a Friday. Why couldn't I do that? Why couldn't I take? I'll tell you, that's the day in which he died on the cross. I want to proclaim his death, not his resurrection. You've got Sunday for resurrection. I want to proclaim his death till he comes. I think I can do that. Since we can't meet together and be safe, I'll just do that on Friday. And what would your point be? Oh, the only authority we have is to do it on the first day of the week, and the only authority we have to take the Lord's Supper is when we assemble together in one place. God does not hold you responsible in COVID because you cannot meet with the saints. And it's interesting to me, they've all argued for, well, I've got to do that. And therefore this way, I don't see them talk about giving that way. I've got to give. They don't talk like that. It's Lord's Supper. See, that's been practiced for years when people go on their journeys and go on their cruises and they go on their trips to the Holy Land. And that's been accepted. And now it's being exposed where they're defending that, and I'm just asking where the pattern is. And it's interesting to me that when I start looking at the argument that the church is not getting away, Catholicism, that's where you find the elements of baptism and the Lord's Supper. It's the church. You get married in the church. That's Catholicism. And I think he had a point in 84, that preacher did, about what is, we're letting a church and that sort of thing getting in the way of our relationship with the Lord. I understand that but he was not arguing there that you can brown bag it in a deer stand. In fact, he made that point. And it's not going to be done when you're forsaking the assembling of yourselves together. He made those parameters at that time to try to show that indeed the church wasn't in the way of that, but the church is not in the way in taking the Lord's Supper in this time with the COVID fears. It is when it's to be done, unless you want to let people do it on any other day of the week. And my point is that if Paul was coming to town, he didn't want to be in everybody's house and collecting it. Because why? It was going to be collected in one place. They would collect it one time on the first day of the week. And it's the church not being a barrier, but being a expeditious thing with the giving, like Paul commanded. And if we violate that, I'll just keep it in my home. I'll lay by and store in my home. I'll be okay. Don't you get in the way of me. Because I have a relationship with God. We all do. But it's going to be according to the authority that we have before us. And everywhere in the New Testament, Paul delayed his trips in order to be there on the first day of the week in Troas. But for 2 weeks, he's on a ship. We had that passage up there. Well, we have Acts 27. And for 2 weeks, he didn't take, there's no indication that he took the Lord's Supper. But I tell you, he broke bread, and he blessed it before he broke it, and people ate on that cruise. They ate a common meal so 276 souls could be saved. It wasn't the Lord's Supper, but they broke bread. It seems to me if that was happening on that ship, you at least have, well, we also broke bread the week before. That's the Lord's Supper. It's silent. It's when you come together. He wanted the body. It's comprised of individuals. That's when. It's not how. It's when you come together. And that's when we've done it. And I'm just thankful to God. I'm thankful to elders. There's never been a time during COVID that you didn't have an opportunity to come and give as you prospered, as God commands. But a lot of people have used this for a reason to virtually assemble and take the Lord's Supper in their home. They make 2 or 3 get together. That doesn't comprise the church. And I just want us to think, because what happens, these circumstances exposes, just like money exposes sometimes our character. These pandemics can expose things, and so it's good to discuss. And if you have any questions, or we'll move on to the identification of the church by name. We don't have very much time, but we can get started. Yes?
If I know sometimes I'm going to be out of town for several weeks at my mother's, sometimes when I come back I run a bigger check, or sometimes I've given several checks to Charlotte, and she turned them in for me. So I may not have been physically here, but I make sure the check is here.
Yeah, I think that's good. It was given on the first day of the week.
And so I understand that, when it's Lord's Supper, you got to be physically here when you come together.
Yeah.
So with giving, I can now I'm thinking ahead of time, what if I'm in a nursing care facility someday and I want to be able to give of my means? Couldn't I mail that in, or someone could come by and they make sure they give my contribution?
I've thought of that, and when that happens here, a lot of times it'll come in the mail. I get people are giving, and I'll put it in that box. But when will that be counted as one? It'll be on the first day of the week. So I may be wrong about that, but I think there's no problem there with that. But to take the Lord's Supper, we can't do that through somebody else, can we? And God does not condemn us when we're not able to do that. And yet that's become the thing that I've just got to do. And we need to, where's the pattern? And then opens up a lot of things that maybe we're not inconsistent with. So we want to, be inconsistent doesn't mean you're right. But it sure does help you stand, well, am I going to be consistent with my giving if I'm saying that church gets in my way? When in reality, no, the church's not in your way, or the time gets in my way. I want to do it other times. And some have said it doesn't make a difference. You do it on Thursday, you do it on Friday, you do it on Saturday. And so we have to come back. What is the pattern that we have set before us? Okay, let's notice. Let's talk about, and we'll just get started. I don't know if you can read fine print there, but we talk about name identification. And what is our name identification of this local church? Parkview Church of Christ. Are we on Parkview Avenue? We're on Rose. What in the world does Parkview have to do with us? It's identifying us. Well, when we started years ago, we were at Parkview Intermediate School in Pasadena. That's not on this street. It's in Pasadena, and that school's getting pretty old now. But it was Parkview, and so we didn't ever change our name when we built the building out here. So it's always been Parkview. So what is that name? It's a word or phrase by which a person, a thing, or a class of things is known. Now, that's a very broad view of it. So is a name important? Is that important to us? Let me just ask you this question when you think about it. What is more important, reading, writing, or naming? Which is more important? Well, you need to read. All right? Need to write. But naming, that's no big thing. Is that a big thing in understanding? You just think, if you were not able to put a name to a class of things, or put a name to a person or thing, podium, what are you going to say? Well, it'd be very hard to communicate, and it'd be very hard to understand things. You go to the park and you got these big old birds and they're quacking and they're flying in. What do we call them? Flying things. Well, I'm putting a class, so what do I call them? I call them a duck. Call them ducks. Call them birds. And name, so there's nothing in a name, you just name it any way you want to. How would we understand things if we were not able to put a name to something to identify it? And I believe that's important with the churches. So this lesson that you're looking at, I want you to notice, and we'll have to stop here, but look at your outline. Church is identified metaphorically. The church is identified relationally. The church is identified locally and regionally. And Scripture will prove every one of those statements. And we're going to put those together. We got questions, and enjoy the journey through it. But you just think, does anybody disagree with me? If you could not name things, life would be pretty difficult of knowing. How do people who are blind and they can't talk, how are they going to learn how to communicate? Because you're going to make a class of things, and you teach people. There's a class of things and describing things a certain way. That's how they're going to be able to know. And I think reading and writing is just as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic. And reading, writing, and naming, I think, is just as important. So Lord willing, next Wednesday we'll continue. Thank you.